In the shadowed fields of 1847 Maryland, a deaf girl born into chains hums a melody she's never heard, pure, haunting, like an angel's lament echoing from the abyss. But what if her voice wasn't a gift, but a curse, a divine reckoning for sins unspoken? Feel the dread grip your soul as silence births a symphony that could damn or redeem. In the oppressive haze of antebellum Maryland, where the sun beat down like the unyielding gaze of an Old Testament god, the Caldwell plantation sprawled like a festering wound on the earth's skin. Tobacco fields stretched endlessly, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind, secrets that Elizabeth, the child at the heart of this tale, would never hear. Born in 1838 amid the stifling humidity of a slave quarters hut, she entered a world muted, as if the Creator himself had sealed her ears in judgment. The air was thick with the acrid tang of sweat-soaked soil, the distant crack of overseers' whips slicing through the humidity like thunderbolts from a wrathful deity. Birds called mournfully from twisted oaks, their songs lost on her, while the rhythmic thud of hose against earth vibrated up through her bare feet, a faint tremor that hinted at rhythms beyond her grasp. Elizabeth's mother, Clara, a woman whose back bore the scars of both lash and loss, had prayed fervently during labor. "Lord, let this child hear your word," she'd whispered, her voice cracking like dry earth underfoot. But the heavens seemed deaf to her pleas. From the moment Elizabeth drew her first breath, the world was a silent theater, a pantomime of gestures, expressions, and vibrations. Clara's lullabies, drawn from spirituals passed down through generations of bondage, fell on unhearing ears. She'd cradle her infant daughter, rocking to the cadence of "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," feeling the words vibrate in her own chest, hoping somehow they might transmit through touch. Elizabeth's eyes, wide and obsidian black, would lock onto her mother's lips, studying the shapes they formed, as if deciphering ancient runes carved by fate. The plantation house loomed like a monolithic idol, its white columns stark against the blood-red clay soil, a symbol of the Caldwell family's iron-fisted dominion. Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell, the mistress, was a figure of porcelain fragility masking a core of steel, her faith. A rigid Calvinism that viewed suffering as divine pruning. She saw Elizabeth not as a soul in need but as an anomaly, a quiet burden in a household buzzing with the clamor of enslaved lives. The other children, ragged and resilient, would scamper through the yards, their laughter a cacophony she couldn't join. They'd shout her name, Lizzie. Lizzie! Waving sticks like scepters, but she'd only turn if she felt the ground shake from their pounding feet or caught the flash of movement in her peripheral vision. To them, she was the quiet one, a ghost child who communicated in a language of hands and eyes, her expressions painting emotions more vividly than words ever could. Dr. Silas Croft's visit came on a sweltering afternoon, the kind where heat waves danced like demonic apparitions over the fields. He arrived in a dusty buggy, his portly frame sweating through his linen suit, tools clinking in a leather satchel that smelled of camphor and regret. Mrs. Caldwell summoned him with a curt note, her handwriting sharp as her tongue. In the dim parlor, lit by flickering oil lamps that cast elongated shadows like accusing fingers, he examined the girl. Elizabeth sat still as a statue, her small hands folded in her lap, feeling the doctor's breath on her skin, a warm puff she interpreted as intrusion. He shone a brass lantern into her ears, prodded with cold instruments, and finally pronounced it, "Congenital deafness, madam. Profound and irreversible. The child lives in a world without sound, as if God has closed the gates of Eden to her ears." The words hung in the air like a biblical curse, echoing themes of original sin and divine withholding. Clara wept that night in the quarters, her tears soaking the rough-hewn blanket as she clutched a tattered Bible. "Why, Lord? Why silence her in a world so full of noise?" she murmured, tracing verses from Psalms about the deaf hearing the voice of God in dreams. But Elizabeth, oblivious to the sobs, slept soundly, her dreams a swirl of colors and sensations, vibrant reds of sunset, the cool silk of river water, the pulse of life beneath her fingertips. In her silence, there was a purity, an untouched sanctity that made the other slaves whisper of her as touched by the Spirit. Old Mama Ruth, the eldest among them, with skin like weathered leather and eyes that had seen auction blocks and uprisings, would nod sagely. "That Chile hears the angels direct," she'd say, her voice a gravelly rumble. "No earthly noise to drown 'em out. Mark my words, she'll sing praises that shake the throne of heaven." Yet, in this spiritual undercurrent lurked shadows of dread. The plantation was rife with tales of divine retribution, slaves who defied and were struck blind, overseers felled by lightning as judgment for their cruelty.
Elizabeth's deafness felt like a mark, a cane-like brand that isolated her even among the oppressed.
Young Thomas, a lanky boy with calloused hands from stable work, became her unlikely companion. He'd stomp patterns on the wooden planks of the barn, watching her face light up as the vibrations traveled up her legs, a Morse code of friendship. Sometimes, she'd mimic him, placing her hand on his throat as he hummed Negro spirituals, feeling the buzz like a captured bee. It was in these moments that Elizabeth first discovered her own voice, not as sound, but as sensation. A low hum from her chest, a vibration that resonated through her bones, like the earth's own heartbeat. Mrs. Caldwell, ever practical, relegated Elizabeth to menial tasks that required no hearing, sorting linens in the laundry, where the steam rose like ghostly apparitions, or tending the herb garden, fingers sinking into loamy soil rich with the scent of mint and sage.
But solitude bred introspection.
Elizabeth would wander to the river's edge, where willows wept branches into the current, their leaves trailing like fingers
of the damned.
She'd sit for hours, palm pressed to the bank, feeling the water's relentless flow, a metaphor for time's inexorable march, or perhaps the flow of grace that even the deaf could sense. It was here, amid the silent symphony of nature, that she began to sing. Not with words, but with tones, deep, resonant hums that built from her diaphragm, vibrating her ribcage like a harp strung with sinew. She felt them as warmth, as power, a private communion with something divine or infernal. Enter Mrs. Eleanora Hathaway, Mrs. Caldwell's sister, whose arrival shattered the monotonous rhythm like a stone through stained glass. She swept in on a spring breeze in 1846, her carriage wheels churning mud into ruts that symbolized her disruptive influence. A widow of means, with raven hair pinned in elaborate coils and dresses of imported silk that whispered luxury, Eleanora was a vortex of ambition. Her eyes, sharp as a serpent's, scanned the estate for opportunities, her mind a ledger of profits and prospects. Widowed young, she'd turned grief into gold through savvy investments in cotton mills and shipping, but her soul hungered for more fame, perhaps, or the thrill of molding fate.
On that fateful veranda afternoon, as cicadas droned an unheard chorus, Eleanora spotted Elizabeth beneath the willow.
The girl was humming, a sustained note that rose and fell like ocean waves, pure and unadulterated, devoid of the flaws that training might impose. Eleanora froze, teacup halfway to her lips, the porcelain clinking faintly against saucer. "What sorcery is this?" she breathed, though no one heard. Approaching with calculated grace, skirts brushing dew-kissed grass, she knelt before the child. Elizabeth looked up, her gaze piercing, as if reading the woman's soul. Eleanora placed a manicured hand on Elizabeth's chest, feeling the vibrations thrum like a living engine. It was no childish babble, it was melody incarnate, raw and ethereal, evoking biblical psalms sung in tongues.
Unknown. Deaf, you say?
Eleanora queried her sister later, voice laced with intrigue. Mrs. Caldwell nodded, fanning herself with a lace handkerchief scented with lavender.
Stone deaf since birth.
Makes those odd noises, but they're harmless. But to Eleanora, they were gold, alchemical, transformative. In her mind's eye, she saw parlors in Philadelphia and New York, audiences agape at a miracle, a deaf slave girl wielding a voice like Maria Malibran's, the opera diva whose tones had enchanted Europe. Yet, beneath the opportunism simmered something darker, a hubris akin to Icarus, tempting divine wrath by meddling in God's design.
Was this redemption for Elizabeth, or exploitation cloaked in benevolence?
Eleanora's letters to associates brimmed with veiled excitement, referencing a vessel of untapped harmony and a spectacle to rival the prodigies of old. Months passed, seasons turning like pages in a forbidden tome. Elizabeth grew, her frame slender yet strong, her skin glowing like burnished copper under the sun. She learned to read from Clara's stolen moments with a smuggled primer, fingers tracing letters that formed words like freedom and soul. Gestures evolved into a fluid sign language, shared with Thomas and a few others, a secret code amid oppression. But the humming persisted, evolving into sequences, rising scales that she felt as escalating pulses, like Jacob's ladder ascending to heaven.
Then came Dr. Cornelius Webb, summoned by Eleanora's insistent correspondence.
He arrived in the fall of 1847, leaves crunching under his boots like brittle bones. Tall and gaunt, with a face etched by years of dissection and debate, Webb was a Philadelphia polymath, physician, anatomist, and whisperer of controversial theories on sensory compensation. His gray eyes gleamed with the fervor of a zealot, his coat pockets bulging with notebooks filled with sketches of ears, throats, and neural pathways. Rumors swirled, he'd vivisected animals to map vibrations, pushed ethical boundaries in pursuit of sensory transcendence. To him, Elizabeth was no child but a puzzle, a living testament to how the body might rebel against divine decree, rerouting senses like a river carving new paths. The household tensed at his presence.
Clara eyed him warily, clutching a wooden cross hidden in her apron.
"This man smells of brimstone," she confided to Mama Ruth. Webb observed Elizabeth for days, notebook in hand, sketching her as she moved through routines. He noted how she anticipated rain by feeling barometric shifts in her skin, how she listened to the blacksmith's hammer through ground vibrations, a somatic symphony. "The deaf compensate," he murmured to Eleonora during evening consultations by candlelight, shadows dancing like imps on the walls. But her voice, it's as if the soul sings unchecked by auditory corruption. The examination room was a converted study, heavy drapes blocking sunlight, creating a confessional gloom. Instruments gleamed on a velvet-clothed table, otoscopes like serpents' tongues, tuning forks forged in silver, a phonautograph prototype to trace vibrations. The air reeked of carbolic acid, sharp and invasive, making Elizabeth's nose wrinkle.
She entered hesitantly, guided by Clara's trembling hand, feeling the floorboards creak underfoot, a warning tremor. Webb began clinically, his touch impersonal yet probing.
He inspected her ears, canal wall smooth and unmarred, no visible defect beyond the profound silence.
Reflex tests followed, a hammer tap to the knee elicited a kick, proving neural pathways intact.
Sensory mapping with feathers and pins revealed heightened tactile awareness, her skin a canvas alive with perceptions the hearing took for granted. Elizabeth endured, her heart pounding a rhythm she felt in her veins, eyes flicking between Webb's stern face and Eleonora's eager one. Mrs. Caldwell lingered in the shadows, Bible in hand, murmuring prayers for protection against this meddling in God's work. Then, the sonic trials. Webb struck a tuning fork, its hum inaudible to her but visible in the quivering prongs.
Held to her ear, nothing.
Against the mastoid, a subtle jolt, her eyes widening as bone conduction transmitted the vibration directly to her inner ear, a ghost of sound, ethereal and teasing.
Fascinating, Webb intoned, voice low as a confessor.
He pressed it to her forehead, where it buzzed like a swarm of locusts from Exodus, to her sternum, resonating in her chest cavity like a cathedral organ, to her fingertips, tingling like divine sparks. Elizabeth's breath quickened, a mix of awe and terror washing over her. For the first time, she heard not with ears, but with her body, a revelation akin to Saul on the Damascus road, blinded yet seeing truth. But Webb pushed further, his ambition a creeping shadow. He introduced a wooden resonator box, placing Elizabeth's hand inside as he hummed scales, letting her feel the air's pulsations. Her face lit with wonder, mimicking the vibrations with her own throat. Eleonora watched, dollar signs in her eyes, envisioning concert halls where this silent siren would draw crowds, her deafness a hook, her voice a miracle.
Yet, Clara sensed the peril, the spiritual cost of turning affliction into spectacle.
"What if her voice calls down judgment?" she whispered that night, as thunder rumbled unheard by her daughter.
As days blurred, Webb's experiments intensified. He mapped her vocal cords with a laryngoscope, marveling at their pristine form, unscarred by misuse.
Elizabeth sang under his direction, feeling prompts through touch, taps for pitch changes, pressures for volume. Her tones emerged crystalline, evoking operatic arias she'd never known, like echoes from a prelapsarian world.
But each session stirred unease. Webb's notes hinted at deeper manipulations, perhaps surgical interventions to enhance her anomaly. Eleonora dreamed of tours, prophets funding abolitionist facades while lining pockets. Elizabeth,
caught in this web, felt a stirring, a voice not just of beauty, but of prophecy, laden with themes of redemption for the enslaved, retribution for the oppressors.
In quiet moments, Elizabeth would retreat to her riverbank sanctuary, humming psalms she intuited through vibration. The water's flow mirrored her emerging power, silent yet forceful, carving canyons over time. Thomas joined her once, signing clumsily, "You sing like angels."
She smiled, placing his hand on her throat, sharing the miracle. But shadows lengthened, whispers of Eleonora's plans to acquire Elizabeth, to mold her into a performing prodigy.
Clara prayed desperately, invoking Job's endurance. "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." Webb's final assessment came under a blood moon, omen-like in its crimson hue.
"She is a marvel," he declared to the sisters, voice echoing in the parlor.
Her deafness isolates her voice from imitation, granting purity. With training, she could rival the divas of La Scala.
But his eyes held a glint of madness, pondering if her condition was curse or covenant, a test of human will against divine silence.
As leaves fell like judgments, the stage set for transformation.
Elizabeth, unaware of the machinations, hummed alone, her vibrations a prayer, for hearing, for freedom, for a voice to shatter chains. Little did she know, her silence was the prelude to a symphony that would echo through history, laced with spiritual chills, divine justice whispering through a deaf girl's song, haunting those who dared exploit it. In the dim confines of the makeshift clinic, where lamplight flickered like hesitant prayers against the encroaching dusk, Dr. Cornelius Webb's experiments unfolded like a forbidden ritual. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of instruments and the faint, acrid bite of antiseptic, a scent that clawed at Elizabeth's nostrils, stirring an instinctive unease she couldn't name. Her small frame perched on the edge of a wooden chair, its grain rough under her palms, she watched Webb's every move with eyes wide as midnight pools, reflecting not fear alone, but a dawning curiosity laced with dread. The tuning forks, silver and cold, gleamed under the light like relics from an alchemist's lair, each strike sending invisible waves through the room, waves that crashed against her body in silent tempests. Webb proceeded with the precision of a high priest conducting a sacrament, his angular face etched with shadows that deepened the hollows of his cheeks. He struck another fork, its prongs humming with a frequency that vibrated the tabletop, then pressed it firmly against her sternum.
Elizabeth's breath hitched, a subtle intake, her ribcage expanding as if to embrace the tremor.
It coursed through her like a river of fire, warm and insistent, mapping pathways in her bones that no sound had ever touched.
Her fingers twitched involuntarily, curling as if grasping at ethereal threads.
Webb's gray eyes narrowed, noting the response in his leather-bound journal, ink scratching like claws on parchment. "Bone conduction," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that she felt as faint pulsations in the floorboards beneath her bare feet.
The auditory nerves bypassed, yet the sensation, profound.
He escalated, introducing the resonant chamber, a polished oak box, its interior hollowed to amplify vibrations, like a confessional booth for the soul's unspoken sins. Striking forks of varying pitches, he held the box first to her chest, where the deep bass notes throbbed like the heartbeat
of some ancient leviathan from Job's tales.
Elizabeth's head tilted, her mahogany skin flushing faintly as the intensity built, a mix of discomfort and revelation washing over her features. Then to her back, the vibrations snaking up her spine like serpents in Eden, tempting knowledge she wasn't meant to possess. Finally, against her skull, where they buzzed like swarms of locusts from Revelation, heralding apocalypse in miniature. Her eyes fluttered shut, a momentary surrender, as if communing with a divine whisperer, god or demon, who could say. The monochord followed, a slender string taut over a resonant frame, its bridge adjustable like the scales of justice in Proverbs. Webb plucked it, the note blooming unseen, then pressed the device to her chest. Elizabeth felt the hum as a living entity, coiling in her core, demanding response. "Discern the shift," Webb instructed, though she read his lips more than felt his words, her gaze locked on the precise formations of his mouth.
He slid the bridge, altering the pitch, higher, sharper, like a blade's edge.
Elizabeth concentrated, her brow furrowing in silent prayer, then nodded, her hand rising to trace the arc in the air, a ghostly mimicry of the vibration's ascent. It was no mere echo, it was intuition, her body a temple attuned to frequencies the hearing dismissed as noise. A chill settled over Webb as realization crystallized. Elizabeth didn't hear in the vulgar sense, polluted by the world's cacophony. No, her perception was purer, biblical in its directness, like the still small voice that spoke to Elijah in the cave, bypassing thunder and wind. Her deafness was a veil, but through it, she felt sound's essence, its architecture, its skeletal form, vibrations that resonated with the very strings of creation.
Sin's shadow loomed here, human hubris meddling in divine design, echoing the Tower of Babel's folly.
Webb's thrill was twofold, scientific triumph, yes, but darker, a whisper of power over this child's fate.
A godlike reshaping that tempted retribution.
He turned to Mrs. Eleanor Hathaway, her silk gown pooling like spilled ink on the floorboards, her eyes gleaming with avarice masked as wonder.
"A marvel," he declared, voice modulated to conceal the undercurrent of excitement. "Not just medical anomaly, but opportunity for knowledge, for acclaim.
Eleonora leaned forward, the lamplight catching the gold locket at her throat, a memento of her late husband, symbolizing lost fortune she sought to reclaim. Their conversations that followed were cloaked in secrecy, held in the drawing room where velvet curtains muffled the outside world, creating a confessional haze. Whispers exchanged like forbidden vows, they plotted Elizabeth's ascension or exploitation. She perceives not with ears, but with her very being, Webb explained, his fingers steepled like a preacher's.
Vibrations as scripture, inscribed on bone and sinew. She can replicate melodies through sensation alone, instinctual, untainted.
Eleonora's skepticism flickered, her mind calculating profits against morals, but greed won, a serpent's coil tightening. The public will see miracle, Webb pressed, his smile thin as a razor's edge.
Divine gift amid human frailty, a testament to spirit's triumph.
Yet unspoken was the sin, deception as grand as any Pharisee's hypocrisy, packaging affliction as blessing for worldly gain. The plan crystallized in those shadowed hours, Elizabeth's removal to Philadelphia, a city of gaslit streets and moral ambiguities, where factories belched smoke like offerings to Mammon. Intensive training under Webb's iron guidance, teaching her to wield her voice not as heard art, but felt sacrament. Secrecy paramount, the illusion of hearing intact, her deafness a hidden cross, lest the miracle shatter.
Eleonora nodded, burying qualms under ambition's soil, rationalizing it as mercy, freeing the girl from plantation chains into gilded ones.
But in her heart's quiet chambers, guilt stirred.
Like Judas's regret, a foretaste of divine accounting.
Clara, Elizabeth's mother, learned of the departure in a Tear Street dawn, the air crisp with autumn's bite. She clutched her daughter in the slave quarters, feeling the child's steady heartbeat against her own, whispering prayers from Psalms, "The Lord hears the cry of the poor, He delivers them from affliction." Elizabeth, sensing the tremors of sobs through touch, signed confusion, wide eyes questioning the upheaval. Thomas watched from afar, stomping a farewell rhythm on the earth, vibrations carrying unspoken sorrow.
The carriage rolled away, wheels churning red clay into dust clouds, symbolizing the uprooting of innocence.
Philadelphia assaulted Elizabeth's senses, the jostle of cobblestones under wheels, a rhythmic earthquake, acrid coal smoke stinging her eyes, throngs of people in woolen coats, their movements a silent ballet of urgency.
The townhouse, modest yet imposing with its brick facade and lace-curtained windows, became her new prison or sanctuary?
Inside, the training room awaited, dim, eternal twilight from drawn shades, as if light itself were a distraction from inner revelations. A grand piano dominated, its ebony surface a mirror for flickering candle flames, beside it, Webb's inventions, resonant boxes like arks of covenant, tuning forks arrayed like sacred tools, the vibrational harmonizer with metal plates humming prophecies when struck.
Days blurred into a relentless liturgy.
Webb at the piano, fingers dancing silent incantations across ivory keys, lips shaping notes like molded clay. Elizabeth observed, her focus a blade's sharpness, straining to decode the alchemy. "Feel it here," he'd gesture, pressing her hand to the soundboard as a chord.
Like Judas's regret, a foretaste of divine accounting.
Clara, Elizabeth's mother, learned of the departure in a Tear Street dawn, the air crisp with autumn's bite. She clutched her daughter in the slave quarters, feeling the child's steady heartbeat against her own, whispering prayers from Psalms, "The Lord hears the cry of the poor, He delivers them from affliction." Elizabeth, sensing the tremors of sobs through touch, signed confusion, wide eyes questioning the upheaval. Thomas watched from afar, stomping a farewell rhythm on the earth, vibrations carrying unspoken sorrow.
The carriage rolled away, wheels churning red clay into dust clouds, symbolizing the uprooting of innocence.
Philadelphia assaulted Elizabeth's senses, the jostle of cobblestones under wheels, a rhythmic earthquake, acrid coal smoke stinging her eyes, throngs of people in woolen coats, their movements a silent ballet of urgency.
The townhouse, modest yet imposing with its brick facade and lace-curtained windows, became her new prison or sanctuary?
Inside, the training room awaited, dim, eternal twilight from drawn shades, as if light itself were a distraction from inner revelations. A grand piano dominated, its ebony surface a mirror for flickering candle flames, beside it, Webb's inventions, resonant boxes like arks of covenant, tuning forks arrayed like sacred tools, the vibrational harmonizer with metal plates humming prophecies when struck.
Days blurred into a relentless liturgy.
Webb at the piano, fingers dancing silent incantations across ivory keys, lips shaping notes like molded clay. Elizabeth observed, her focus a blade's sharpness, straining to decode the alchemy. "Feel it here," he'd gesture, pressing her hand to the soundboard as a chord thrummed, deep, resonant, like Earth's groan in Genesis creation. She'd mimic, throat contracting, breath expelling in a raw moan that evolved, session by session, into tone. His hand on her larynx, demonstrating tension, on his chest, sharing vibrations like communion wine. Higher pitches demanded delicacy, a lightness she felt as tingling in her skull, evoking seraphim's calls. Progress was torturous, months of frustration where despair loomed like the psalmist's valley of shadow. Elizabeth faltered, retreating into silence, eyes pleading for respite echoing Job's cries against heaven's silence. Eleonora intervened then, her touch feigned maternal, words painted in false hope, grand halls, applause like rain she could feel, freedom from bondage. "Your mother would beam with pride," she'd sign, exploiting filial bonds like Delilah shearing strength. Elizabeth endured, yearning connection, her spirit a flickering flame against isolation's wind. As mastery dawned, complexities unfolded, arias from Bellini or Rossini, web swaying as if possessed, vibrations cascading like waterfalls. Elizabeth absorbed, hands on frame, then replicated, voice soaring, rich timbre defying origins, purity born of void. Neighbors whispered, Irish maids exchanging tales over wash basins, hearing ethereal songs shake walls, seeing the deaf black girl escorted like a relic. Rumors spread, miracle child, voice from heaven, divine intervention amid abolition's stirrings. Webb nurtured them, dropping veiled hints at salons, building mystique like a prophet's aura. Yet spiritual undercurrents chilled, Elizabeth's voice, a double-edged sword, redemption's hymn or retribution's dirge? In quiet nights, she'd hum alone, vibrations of private prayer, pondering her role in this cosmic drama. Guilt shadowed Eleonora, dreams haunted by chains transmuted but unbroken. Webb pondered his soul's ledger, ambitions cost echoing Faustian bargains. The city pulsed outside, unaware of the paradox brewing, a deaf girl's symphony, laced with sin's echo, poised to shatter illusions and summon judgment. In the shadowed corridors of Philadelphia's elite salons, where crystal chandeliers hung like suspended tears and the air carried the heavy perfume of ambition mingled with hypocrisy, Dr. Cornelius Webb and Mrs. Eleanora Hathaway wove their legend with meticulous care. They were no longer mere guardians of a gifted child, they had become architects of myth, crafting a narrative as intricate and deceptive as the serpent's promise in the garden. Elizabeth, now a young woman of 16, her frame graceful yet marked by the quiet strength of endured isolation, became the centerpiece of their grand illusion. Her voice, once a private vibration, a secret communion with the unseen, was now commodified, paraded as proof of human triumph over affliction, a living rebuttal to the era's cruel doctrines of racial inferiority and divine disfavor. The whisper spread like wildfire through dry tinder, first among the Irish maids who scrubbed the townhouse floors, then to neighbors peering through lace curtains, and finally into the drawing rooms of physicians, abolitionists, and cultural arbiters. A miracle in human form, they murmured over sherry and candlelight. A Negro girl, born deaf, singing arias that rival the angels. Dr. Webb fed the flames judiciously, casual mentions at medical societies, veiled letters to influential editors, each drop of intrigue designed to build unbearable anticipation. He understood the psychology of wonder, let doubt simmer, then douse it with spectacle. The public craved the inexplicable, and in an age of steam engines and slavery's moral rot, Elizabeth became their sacred anomaly, a sign that Providence could still intervene in a fallen world. Preparations for her debut unfolded like a liturgical rite. Mrs. Hathaway, her fortunes teetering on the edge of ruin from bad investments and mounting debts, spared no coin, gowns of deep indigo silk imported from France, their fabric whispering against Elizabeth's skin like cool river water, a private salon venue, intimate yet prestigious, its walls paneled in dark mahogany that absorbed light and amplified sound, invitations etched in gold leaf, sent only to those whose endorsement could multiply profits tenfold, doctors eager for case studies, critics hungry for sensation, philanthropists seeking moral uplift. The story they sold was polished to perfection, a child of bondage, lifted by extraordinary talent and benevolent guidance, her deafness a tragic veil through which divine light shone undimmed. Never the full truth, that her hearing was tactile resonance, bone-deep perception, a compensation bordering on the supernatural. To admit that would unravel the miracle, better to let audiences believe God had bypassed her ears to touch her soul directly. The autumn night of the debut arrived crisp and portentous, leaves skittering across cobblestones like restless spirits. Carriages queued outside the salon, horses snorting plumes of steam into the chill air, their hooves clopping a rhythm Elizabeth felt through the ground long before she entered. Inside, the atmosphere thrummed with expectation, perfume heavy as incense, polished wood gleaming under gas jets that hiss like serpents, murmurs rising and falling like waves on a distant shore.
Guests, men in tailcoats, women in crinolines, leaned forward, eyes sharp with skepticism and hope.
Abolitionists saw in her a symbol of emancipation through art, racists waited for proof of inferiority, scientists sought anomaly. Backstage, Elizabeth stood motionless, her heart pounding a frantic cadence she sensed in her throat. The deep blue gown clung to her like a second skin, its weight a reminder of the role she played. Dr. Webb's hand rested on her arm, firm, possessive, a tether.
He mouthed instructions slowly, breathe from here. Feel the pulse. Let the vibration carry you.
His eyes burned with intensity, a mix of pride and fear.
Elizabeth nodded, her own gaze steady, absorbing his lips' shapes as scripture. When?
Her name echoed through the hall, Miss Elizabeth Greenfield, the silent nightingale. A hush descended, thick as fog. She stepped onto the stage, gaslights bathing her in golden warmth, casting long shadows that danced like accusing fingers. The audience beheld her, mahogany skin luminous against pale silk, eyes large and luminous, scanning faces she could never hear react.
Mr. Arthur Finch, the pianist, began the introduction, a simple aria from Bellini, its opening chords vibrating up through the floorboards like Earth's own sigh.
Elizabeth closed her eyes briefly, centering on the familiar thrum, the architecture of melody she knew by bone and breath.
Then she sang.
The sound that emerged was unearthly, rich, resonant, soaring with a clarity that pierced the room like light through stained glass.
It filled every corner, wrapped around listeners like a warm embrace laced with sorrow.
No strain, no artifice, only purity born of silence's forge.
Voices that had critiqued Jenny Lind now fell mute in awe. Tears traced silent paths down powdered cheeks, hands clutched programs until paper creased. How could deafness birth such perfection?
It defied reason, evoked biblical wonders, the lame walking, the blind seeing. When the final note faded, silence held for a heartbeat, then applause erupted, thunderous, vibrating through Elizabeth's feet and chest like a tidal wave of absolution. She bowed, feeling the energy wash over her, a strange communion with strangers who saw miracle where she felt only sensation.
The triumph was absolute.
Newspapers the next morning screamed headlines, "The Miracle Voice of Philadelphia, Divine Gift in a Deaf Negro Girl." Critics, once doubtful, now waxed poetic, invoking providence, human resilience, the triumph of spirit over flesh.
Fame descended swift and intoxicating, a golden chain. Mrs. Hathaway planned tours, New York's glittering halls, Boston's cultured parlors. Washington's political salons, each stop promising greater wealth, greater acclaim.
Dr. Webb managed every detail, schedules, contracts, the perpetual guarding of the secret. Elizabeth became commodity and icon, her performances a nightly sacrament of deception.
Yet cracks appeared in the edifice. Elizabeth, maturing in mind as well as voice, began to perceive the cage.
She noticed the wary glances when physicians attended, the way Webb's hand tightened on her elbow in crowds, the isolation that grew with fame. In New York, Dr. Alastair Finch, an eminent otologist, watched from the front row, his analytical gaze dissecting her every cue. He noted her anticipation of the pianist's tempo through visual rhythm, the lack of startle at sudden claps, only response to floor vibrations. Doubt seated, if truly deaf, how the flawless synchronization? In the same audience sat Elias Thorne, a journalist whose pen had exposed frauds before. The story felt too seamless, the guardians too vigilant. He began inquiries, discreet letters to Maryland contacts, probing the Caldwell estate's records, seeking the child who'd once hummed wordless melodies by Riverside. During a Boston engagement at the Tremont Theater, fate tested the illusion. A gas jet sputtered, flickered out, plunging the stage into momentary gloom. The pianist faltered, a missed beat, fingers hovering. Elizabeth's voice wavered for a fraction, a held note stretching unnaturally before she recovered.
From the wings, Webb stiffened, sweat beading on his brow.
Finch noted it, Thorne scribbled furiously.
A visual cue disrupted. Why, if soundless? The seed sprouted.
Elizabeth experimented in secret rehearsals, closing her eyes to rely solely on internal resonance and floor tremors. Pitch held, rhythm maintained, but emotional nuance faltered without lips to read, movements to mirror.
She understood, her hearing was a mosaic touch, sight, bone echo, not the effortless gift proclaimed.
Awareness grew like dawnlight, illuminating manipulation's contours.
Webb sensed it, paranoia rising.
He restricted her world further, no books that might teach sign or science, no unsupervised conversations, endless reinforcement of the divine purpose. Praise alternated with reminders of dependence, a velvet-gloved control echoing slavery's subtler chains.
Mrs. Hathaway unraveled under guilt's weight. Laudanum became her solace, eyes glassy, hands trembling like autumn leaves.
One night after a Philadelphia triumph, she found Elizabeth alone, practicing a passage from Verdi, voice filling the room like sacred chant. Hathaway watched, tears streaming.
"Do you understand what we've made you?" she whispered, lips trembling. Elizabeth turned, questioning.
Hathaway shook her head, fleeing into shadows, conscience a wound that would not heal. The medical world fractured, some hailed plasticity of senses, others, like Finch, published cautious articles in journals, suggesting bone conduction's role, planting doubt without accusation. Thorne closed in, uncovering a disgruntled former associate of Webb's, whispers of ethical breaches in fabricated cases. Elizabeth sang on, voice ever more powerful, expressive, yet inwardly, a storm brewed.
No longer mere mimic, she questioned her role, instrument of redemption or pawn in sin's theater? Her performances, once joy and vibration, now carried undertones of lament, psalms of the oppressed, cries against exploitation. In this whirlwind of adulation and unraveling, the Black Swan soared, but shadows lengthened. Divine justice, long deferred, stirred in the silence she knew best. The illusion frayed, threads pulling toward revelation or reckoning. The unraveling began not with thunder, but with whispers, subtle, insidious, creeping through Philadelphia's fog-shrouded streets like the slow drip of conscience. Mr. Arthur Davies, once a promising student under Dr. Cornelius Webb's tutelage in the shadowy realms of sensory experimentation, had been cast aside when success beckoned. Bitter, excluded from the glory he helped forge, Davies turned informant. In dimly lit taverns and hushed medical parlors, he spoke of Webb's early obsessions, dissecting the boundaries of perception, probing how the brain might rewire itself to translate vibration into phantom sound. He saw the body as clay, Davies confided to Elias Thorne, the journalist whose pen had already begun carving cracks in the facade. Ruthless. Willing to bend ethics, even morality, for discovery. Thorne's notebook filled with damning details, Webb's fascination with substitution, his belief that deprivation could birth transcendence, his cold ambition that viewed a child not as soul but specimen. Elizabeth felt the shift in her bones before words ever reached her. The air in the townhouse thickened with unspoken dread, furtive glances exchanged over breakfast tables, doors closing too quickly, conversations halting when she entered. Her world, already a tapestry of vibrations, now hummed with anxiety, a low, persistent tremor that resonated in her chest like distant thunder warning of storm. She was no longer merely the miracle, she had become the enigma the world demanded to dissect. The illusion, woven so tightly over years of meticulous deception, frayed at its edges, threads pulling toward inevitable collapse. The culmination arrived on a winter evening in 1855, the Academy of Music aglow like a temple of false idols. Red brick and white marble rose majestic against the night sky, gas lamps flickering like watchful eyes. Inside, every tier-brimmed opulent boxes draped in velvet, galleries packed with the curious and the devout. The air carried the mingled scents of beeswax polish, perfume, and the metallic tang of anticipation. Elizabeth felt it all through the stage floor, the collective pulse of thousands of hearts, a symphony of human expectation vibrating up her legs like the earth's own breath. Dr. Webb prowled backstage, his impeccable coat unable to hide the tremor in his hands. His gray eyes scanned relentlessly stagehands, musicians, the few permitted journalists. He knew the threats, Dr. Alastair Finch in the orchestra seats, analytical gaze sharp as scalpel, Elias Thorne scribbling in the shadows, ready to strike. Mrs. Eleanora Hathaway, frail and trembling, clutched a small vial of laudanum, her once steely resolve dissolved into haunted fragility. Her eyes fixed on Elizabeth with a mixture of awe and terror, as if beholding a judgment she had summoned. Elizabeth stood serene in shimmering ivory silk, the gown a stark contrast to her deep mahogany skin, making her appear almost luminous under the footlights, like a biblical figure stepping from prophecy.
The orchestra launched into the overture, powerful waves crashing through the boards into her body.
She watched the conductor's baton blur in silent command, feeling the surge in her diaphragm.
Her entrance drew thunderous ovation, stomping feet sending shockwaves. She rode like a tide. The first aria soared, voice pure, resonant, filling the vast hall with unearthly clarity.
Audiences wept, entranced, lost in what they believed divine favor.
But Finch observed keenly. He noted her eyes tracking the conductor's every gesture, the subtle tilt of her head aligning with vibrational cues. When a cymbal crashed sharp, startling to hearing ears, Elizabeth remained unmoved, expression unchanged.
No flinch. No startle.
Only stillness, as if the sound had never existed.
Intermission brought the trap.
Through Thorne's connections, the eccentric composer Monsieur Dubois, wild grey hair, flamboyant gestures, was installed to conduct a surprise piece, an unfamiliar, improvisational work with erratic shifts, impossible to anticipate.
Elizabeth returned to the stage, Dubois bowing theatrically before launching into chaos.
Panic flickered in her eyes, a rare crack in composure.
She glanced to Webb in the wings, he mouthed desperately, "Watch me." Lips urgent, pleading. The orchestra played, vibrations assaulted her, a jumble of unfamiliar patterns.
She closed her eyes, seeking center, the internal rhythm she knew by heart. Her voice began hesitant, pitch wavering, off-kilter.
The audience stirred uneasily.
Finch leaned forward, Thorne's pen flew. Elizabeth opened her eyes, locking on Dubois, mimicking his sway, anticipating cues through visual rhythm and floor tremors. Slowly, painfully, she found footing, voice straining yet surging with raw power, desperation infusing each note like a prayer in extremis. Then, at the crescendo's peak, Dubois halted, arms dropping, orchestra falling silent on his command. Elizabeth, caught in momentum, continued for several bars, voice echoing alone in the sudden void. Gasps rippled through the hall, murmurs swelled to a roar.
Realization dawned, she sang on, unaware the music had ceased.
Horror etched her face as she faltered, voice dying. The audience beheld not miracle, but mechanism, beauty born of touch and sight, not supernatural hearing. Finch rose, voice cutting clear, "Ladies and gentlemen, a remarkable display, but one that reveals truth. Elizabeth is profoundly deaf.
She perceives through vibration, through visual cues.
Remove them, introduce the unknown, and the human limits appear.
No divine bypass, only extraordinary adaptation." Outrage, confusion, betrayal swept the auditorium. Shouts demanded answers, some sat stunned, illusions crumbling like Jericho's walls. Webb rushed the stage, face contorted, outrage. Sabotage.
But the tide had turned. The truth, partial yet devastating, emerged, no miracle of hearing restored, but a profound exploitation of sensory compensation.
Elizabeth stood alone amid chaos, vibrations of anger and disappointment crashing over her.
She looked to Webb, then to Hathaway, collapsed in the wings, ashen and broken. Understanding crystallized, she was no heavenly vessel, but a crafted instrument, ambition's pawn, sin's unwitting echo. The aftermath raged like a biblical reckoning. Newspapers, once adoring, now screamed the great deception, silent fraud unveiled. Webb's reputation shattered, patience fled, colleagues ridiculed his groundbreaking claims as hubris. He retreated into obscurity, haunted by failure, a man who played God and lost. Hathaway descended into laudanum's haze, mind fracturing under guilt's weight, whispering apologies to phantoms, fortune bled dry by scandal and regret. Elizabeth, thrust into precarious freedom, became object of pity and protection. Abolitionists rallied, seeing her not as fraud but victim, exploited like so many in chains, even after emancipation's promise. Finch and Thorne shaped the new narrative, scientific accounts of bone conduction, sensory plasticity, demystifying without diminishing.
Her talent genuine, rooted in human resilience, not supernatural gift.
She chose to sing on, but transformed. No longer the silent nightingale of illusion, but Elizabeth Greenfield, the deaf artist who felt music's pulse. She collaborated openly, musicians learned touch cues, subtle vibrations, she conducted through floor resonance, internal harmony. Her voice deepened with honesty, raw emotion born of truth, resonating more profoundly than any fabricated wonder. The world remained silent to her ears, a vibrating canvas of tremors and textures.
Yet she navigated it masterfully, translating sensation into universal song.
Performances across the nation inspired the marginalized, disabled, enslaved in spirit, proving adversity could forge beauty, not curse it.
Her legacy endures complex, wonder to some, cautionary tale of ambition sin to others. But to those who grasp the depths, she stands pioneer, embodiment of spirit transcending limitation.
Born in bondage's shadow, manipulated by greed, she emerged resilient, a quiet beacon in history's silence, echoing redemption where exploitation once reigned. In the hush after applause, her unheard melody persists, not as divine anomaly, but testament to human ingenuity against divine silence. A story of sin confronted, grace reclaimed, and the profound ways the soul sings through every barrier.